Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to another premium customer workshop. Super excited to have you all today. And notice that we actually have our guest designer, Gary Liu, joining us on our call. So very special guest, and we'll be using some of his design advice throughout the workshop. So really excited to welcome him on board. As always, we've got Erica as well, who will be helping us in the comments and in the chats. So just a little bit of housekeeping for everybody who's joining us for the first time. You should see on the right-hand side, we have a comment area. So throughout this workshop, feel free, if you've got any questions that you want to ask, you can write them in the comments, and Erica will do her best to answer them directly in the chat, or if they're relevant to what we're building, then we can highlight them on the screen and answer them directly. So with that, welcome everybody. Feel free to introduce yourselves. Go ahead, say where you're calling in from. You can add that in the comments. Usually we get people from all over the world. So yeah, feel free to add those in the comments. Now, with that, I'm just going to give a little introduction to Gary. Gary's joined the Bolt team as our graphic designer and user interface designer. So Gary, just want to say a big welcome. Thanks for joining us on the workshop. How are you feeling about this?
Well, it's a pleasure being here. I'm excited to share what I've been doing at Bolt, but also just my experience as a designer over the last decade. It's my first ever live webinar, so we'll see how this goes.
Yeah. We'll bear with you, but for everybody else joining us, Gary's, he's such a talented designer. We're fortunate to have him on the Bolt team. Would you like to quickly discuss some of the design work you've done over the last 10 years?
Yeah, I've done quite a bit of work with different startups, including building a couple myself. And the end user product range from consumer apps to corporate apps, dashboards. But I think what's interesting about what Bolt can do is we can do pretty much all of that within this one system. So, and my job here is to tell that story visually, and then to inspire others to do the same. So,
yeah, awesome. Thank you, Gary. And yeah, something that we've noticed is that these UI workshops are really beneficial. Sometimes you may just get like a generic output from the agent, but using some of the tips that we're going to cover today is a great way that you can really enhance and step up how the UI of your project looks. And with that, we're just about ready to dive into the workshop. So here we are designing. Today we'll be designing a polished software as a service onboarding user interface with our guest designer, Gary Liu. So basically what we'll be doing is we'll be working through a set of rules for turning a functional Bolt project into something that feels production ready, synthesized from a whole bunch of research that we've done here. So, and some best practices. Okay, so the single thesis that you should take away coming out of this is that polish is not just for decoration, it's clarity, and it's adding utility into your site. So a more appealing interface can raise the perceived ease of use, but the biggest wins in a SaaS onboarding flow come from narrowing each screen to one job, making hierarchy obvious, and at a glance, strengthening the action hierarchy, reducing the input, and making the states explicit. So we'll be covering all of that as we go through the project. So now let's jump over into our Bolt project. And I'm going to give you a quick preview of what we've initially set up. This is going to be our starting point, and we're going to add a series of prompts to this throughout the course of the workshop, including some important design principles so that we can get something more polished by the end of it. So quickly looking through this, we've created this example SaaS app, which is similar to like a Linear or a Jira, where it's like a task tracking app. And this is almost like the enterprise onboarding flow. So when they come to this app, this is the first thing that they see. And notice we've got 4 different steps, and we're asking for a variety of different information. So we're going to quickly go through this. So I'll just show you where it's at. So it's got some of these required fields. We're going to then enter some information. So there's our password. These are optional, so we can leave these blank. It wants us to set up a workspace name. So there we go. We're going to add that in there. And then if we scroll down, we say our role, we say the team size, we'll say the primary use case, and then there's a few other things that we're going to fill out. We're going to say agree to our terms of service, make sure that we have everything filled out, select our industry. Notice, let's just kind of pay attention to some of the issues that we're facing so far. We've got a lot of these required fields all in one step. Also, if I haven't selected industry, if I forgot one of these required fields and I come down, notice it's not really telling me what I'm missing. So that's something we can kind of keep in the back of our mind. Now, once we've filled out everything, this is holding us up because we haven't filled anything out just yet. And it's causing a bit of an issue here. I'm going to skip this for now. We're going to come to the second step where we can see it's asking us to invite some teammates. We can press continue. We can then, choose our template, click continue. And then once we're all set, we're going to click go to dashboard. This takes a second and we're in here in our dashboard. So that's basically the flow that we're going to go through some design principles, and we're going to use these design principles to improve that flow. So let's come back. We're going to sign out. And while that's working, I'm going to jump over into our back into our presentation, and we're going to look through some of these design laws. So the first thing is basically Hicks law. Now here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand this over to Gary. These are some, as I was saying, important design laws, and Gary, feel free to go ahead and start, maybe explaining this.
I think the first thing I want to talk about is, rather than thinking through these laws as a theoretical statement or like a hard law, treat them as like a practical tool. So when I look at any design decisions, I think through, how is this going to translate for the end user, and rather than thinking from a theoretical standpoint. So, but I will start with the Hicks law. So just like anything, more choices, slower decisions. In a practical sense, if you go to a supermarket and you're presented with 10 different options, it's quite challenging to pick the one that you like. And that applies very naturally to design. So in the example that we have shared here, one common user component is choosing a pricing plan or any sort of options that require multiple choices. So here, rather than showing, let's say, 6, 7, or even 8 different options, it's best to stick with 3. I think we've all come to that natural understanding that, presenting 3 options most likely will drive the user to pick one of the 3. So let's go to the next slide, please. And then, and the Miller's law is very similar to the Hicks law. Our mind can only contain or remember so much information at a time. So chunks of anything that exceeds it, for example, phone numbers, codes, you see this applicable in multi-step forms. Let's break them into bytes that our short memory can actually hold. And can you go to the next slide, please?
Yeah, sure.
And let's work on the prompt. So how both the Hicks and Miller's law, how they're applicable is, so using these principles, and this is where we can input this into the Bolt input prompt, break the let's get everything set up stage of the onboarding into a variety of smaller steps, making the total amount of steps in the onboarding flow longer so that it feels more effortless for a user to complete. And then now William's going to show you,
I'm going to paste this prompt in here. And what I'm going to do is just change over to a different model. And we're going to send this off. while that's working, we haven't had any changes this time, which is good. Let's jump back into, I think we've got a couple examples of this.
Definitely.
So, yeah. Feel free, Gary, if you want to outline this slide here.
So another common use case that we see is with buttons, and often we want people to emphasize or grab their attention and then emphasize one particular action. And both Apple and Google do a really good job at this, and they tend to only focus on one button in a particular task. So on the left, you can see there it's a set of 4 buttons, and what happens here is, as you can imagine, if you're reading the buttons from left to right, it becomes a little tedious to get to the launch app. So instead, what we recommend that you do is just really give the action button a lot of space, a lot of emphasis, not just with colors, but also in terms of the rows, or maybe even reducing the number of buttons in total. So that would drive the user's attention more closely at what you want them to achieve. So it sounds like the prompt is finished. Is that right?
Let's have a look. Okay, it's still working through. So, and then here's another example. So basically, Gary, do you want to go over this one about sort of revealing these progressively?
Absolutely. So kind of back, very similar to the Hicks and Miller's law, our brain can only contain so much information at one time, any given time. So what we recommend that you do is let's reveal the complexity slowly but surely. So let's defer some of the more advanced or rarely used options so that users can learn the interface and finish the core tasks. I know sometimes we want to show them as much as we can, but often we can reduce it to maybe 1 or 2 primary and secondary actions. So in this case, you can see for the framework component, we give them 2 options, either next.js or Astro, and then database will be either Supabase and none. And then right underneath, you see an advanced option toggle. And then when you hit it, it will then show you perhaps tertiary action items that maybe are not relevant to 80% of users, but you're still showing them an option to find it if they choose so.
Great. Let's jump back in, see how this is going. Okay, we're almost on our way through. So guys, let's just keep this in mind, like what we're doing here, where the goal of this prompt is to break down this initial step so that it's broken up over a variety of different steps instead of just one big. Users will come to this and they may churn because they see, oh my gosh, there's so much information to fill out. So let's just remember that, and we're going to start on the next design law, and then we're going to come back and see how this has been implemented. So yeah, Gary, do you want to talk about this?
Absolutely. And I think part of what often people think of design, they think of the visual, the colors, the beauty of the surfaces that we see. And that largely plays a role because, we are visual creatures. We are attracted to beauty naturally. And often the case, there is a lot of intangible value that comes with beauty when it comes to UI design. So, and here the example that we've shown.
Oh, sorry, carry on, Gary.
So you have this UI component with, in this case, it would be showing them the revenue, the new signups, the active users. Here it looks undone to me, but on the right, it's very similar to Stripe's design. As you can see, the primary, if you look at this component, right, where does your attention go to? For me, it's the green, and that shows the, I guess, the change in revenue comparing this week versus last week's. And then the second thing that I look at is potentially the view reports. Here you can see there's only one primary button. So this very much relates to what we just talked about, right? Where do you want to direct the user's attention to per view?
Yep, Gary, you've touched on this. This is the prompt, but we're just going to skip past this for now. this is an example of what the prompt can do. So for example, sometimes, in the onboarding flow, you may be asking them, do you want to be setting up a product roadmap, a bug tracker, or a sprint board? Adding nice little SVG graphics like these here is just a really nice aesthetic touch that you can add. Okay, Gary, do you want to touch on the theory of the Doherty threshold?
Yeah, definitely. So, funny enough, we are experiencing some of the the lag in our prompts, and this is very relevant to how we create software where users, depending on how the response speed is, we want to give them a different experience. So, for example, anything between 0 and 100 milliseconds feels very instant. We don't have to give them any feedback. And then between 100 and 400, give them a subtle confirmation is enough. And then between 400 and 1 second, maybe when their attention starts to waver, perhaps show a spinner or a loader to give them an indication that it's still being processed. Between 1 and 10 seconds, give them a modal that we are actually showing you on the Bolt page right now, which is a progressive meter that shows the progress that has taken place, what's done, and what's being worked on. Anything above 10 seconds, perhaps just give them a note telling them that to come back at a later time to view the changes and the progress that's been made. And sometimes we experience a heavy backend where there's a lot of data that's being processed or being updated, and if you can get around it, there are UI tricks, hacks that flourishes that you can include to make it seem, whether it's faster, but also just make that waiting experience more pleasant. And that way, it communicates to the users that you're very aware of the lag that exists. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but you want to give them that experience, even if things are outside of our control. So.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Gary. Let me quickly jump in. I see this one, we've created a plan here. So let's just have a look at these clarifying questions. So 1, do we have a specific color? I'm just going to say blue. 2, for the profile photo, should it actually upload? Not necessary now. And then 3, should the launch dashboard button to an actual dashboard page? We'll say yes, we'll turn it off plan mode. And hopefully this one builds. Let's see how that goes. Hey everyone, just a little service announcement. We had some technical difficulties during the workshop. And so what I've done is I've gone ahead and re-recorded some parts of it. So you may notice that throughout this video that we may get some chopping and changing between just me and also our hosts as well. But the whole point of this is so that we can go back through all of the prompts of the workshop with this recording, and then also you can see how all of these have been implemented. So excuse us on this, bear with us. And as I said, we'll do our best so that you can follow along with this workshop for the recording. Okay, so the plan is completed, and let's now have a look through what it's implemented. So we can see it now has 8 steps instead of 4. It's broken down this first initial monolithic step 1 into a variety of other steps. So let's now test this out and see how it goes. Create account. Okay, we're up to step 2. Name your workspace. Continue. Nice. I like that, how that animates. We'll choose our role. See, now it's much more approachable to go through these step by step rather than all at once. Set your time preferences. Great. System, continue. Pick your first template. So let's pay particular attention to this one. Notice that we've just got text here, and that's something that we will be working on later. Product roadmap, and invite some teammates, and we're all done. Now, watch when I click go to dashboard. When we click this button, it's going to send all this off to the server. Sometimes it's going to verify the information and things like that. And sometimes this can take like a second or 2. So just pay attention to how much time this takes. Okay, so maybe 2 seconds or so. So just remember that that's something as well we probably want to address. Great. So now that that's done, let's jump back in and look at one of our other prompts. Right. So the aesthetic usability rule for the product roadmap, bug tracker, and sprint board add refined miniature UI previews to each of these cards that look like authentic product surfaces. Each illustration should be small inline SVG mock of the actual interface template represents. So I'm going to copy that prompt, jump back in here, and we're going to sign out so we can begin this onboarding flow again. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to /clear the context. So we're not having all of that previous context that we used. It's now not included in the next prompt, saving us tokens. Here we go for the product roadmap, bug bracket, and sprint tracker board. All add refined. Okay, yep, that looks good. Great. And so now I'm going to send that off. Okay, so the prompt is complete. And now notice I've also added another thing in here. I've added autofill. So this basically very quickly fills just for the sake of the demo. I'm going to come in here, do this as fast as possible. Yep, it does this too. These are easy. Now, here we go. All right. So if we have a look at pick our first template, notice that we've added these nice little, visual SVGs. We can see the sprint board and the product roadmap and the bug tracker. Now, we haven't given a huge amount of context. If we had provided, say, like screenshots when we were asking for each of these, we could get it a lot clearer on what it's done. Also, because we haven't actually built these out in the dashboard after the onboarding yet, it also doesn't have that context. But you can see it's made a good start. And so this is what we're trying to convey, that we want to create these nice little images that just add that nice little bit of flair when we're choosing these options. So let's go ahead, continue. And I think we're ready for our next prompt. Let's jump in here. So coming down, here we have, so the Doherty threshold prompt. It seems as though it takes a second or two for the onboarding to be completed after the final button has been clicked. Now, this situation may be for whatever reason. Sometimes you may be uploading a lot of data. For example, say a user has uploaded a video and then add that to the database and it's several megabytes or even, tens, hundreds of megabytes. If this is happening, some sort of upload progress or something that basically shows what they're doing. And this, depending on how long this takes, defines the different actions that we're going to use. So let me copy this prompt. And because it takes a second or two, we probably don't need more than a little bit of text and a spinner. A spinner could work, but let's just go ahead and add some text as well. So what I'm going to do is I'll scroll down. I'm going to paste that prompt and let's go ahead and let's build that out. The agent's finished working, so let's test it out. We're going to autofill. Here we go, autofill. Autofill, autofill, autofill. Continue. And here we go. You're all set, Juno. Let's click go to dashboard. There we go. Have a look at that. Much better. It makes the user feel like something's happening and like it's not stuck. Okay. Now on to the next one. Let's have a look through here. So we've done the Doherty threshold. The peak and end rule. So here's our prompt. Paste it in here. Now, because we're sort of working on a new feature, well, I mean, it's still working on the onboarding, but if you're working on one part of the onboarding and another part, we're continuously sort of building up the agent's context. And some of that, like that last part, isn't particularly relevant to the new prompt that we're going to be asking. So whenever your prompts, think of it like a Venn diagram, right? If a Venn diagram has a big overlap in the middle, then it's worth keeping the same context. If it's got hardly any overlap, then you can feel free to just clear the context so that you're you've refreshed the agent's memory and you're working with, the maximum context window when you start your new feature. So we'll paste our prompt. Here it is. Please add an explosion of confetti to the last button of the onboarding flow. When the user clicks this button, they should feel celebrated. Also, when they reach halfway, show a small animated, "You're going great, keep going," appear above the progress bar. This should be a small sign of encouragement so they keep going. Great. Okay, so now we're going to build this out. Okay, the prompt is complete. Let's check it out. So autofill, workspace, role, team. Now, if it's worked properly, hopefully this being the halfway point, we should see some little encouragement up here. Let's see. There we go. Okay, nice little things like that. So maybe this could be an example of a peak experience, something you don't really expect. It could do a little bit better than this as well. Like it could be, a little bit of confetti or maybe an animated character, something like that. If you've got like a brand mascot, this could be a good place where they can come in. Duolingo does a really good job of that. So all little things like this, when you're interacting with other products, keep this in mind and start paying attention to this, because now that you understand some of these rules and laws, you'll start noticing them in other products. Here we go. I will point out that notice how we're getting a layout shift here. So as soon as that appears, it basically slides everything down. So, which is frustrating and annoying. So let's prompt this in a way with you're halfway there, keep going, you're doing great. Add confetti to this and also make it have absolute position, and it shouldn't cause any layout shift with the elements underneath it. There we go. So let's build that out. And while that's working, let's test out the confetti. We'll select this, skip. Here we go. You're all set. Hey, look at that. Okay, much better. Much better. Great. Let's test that little fix, autofill. Nice. Okay, paying attention to it now. Nice. Okay, not bad, not bad. It did seem like there was a little bit of a layout shift. Oh, let's get rid of that. Let's have a look. Oh, no, that's just how these steps animate in from the bottom. So let's just watch it one more time. Looks good. Looks good. Great. Continue. And let's see how this looks. Perfect. Yes, we like it. It's looking good. Now we're on to the next step. So that's the peak and end rule covered. And yes, the Zeigarnik Effect. So do research again. Now we're prompting it to do research. Now, because we're doing that, that's going to use up some context. So what I'd like to do is I'll clear the context beforehand. Do research into the Zeigarnik Effect. If the user skips over any questions from the onboarding process, please remember what they have skipped and add a non-blocking finish setup component to the top right of the dashboard after they've completed their onboarding. Encourage them to finishing what they haven't yet completed. So let's copy this. We'll come in and we'll paste it. Now, if we remember back to earlier, the clarifying questions of the plan, it was asking us, for example, do we want to ask them questions such as where they heard about this SaaS product? So the options could be like Google or social networks or something like that. And remember, we said no need to include some of these unnecessary questions. But this is a good point where we can include some of those other questions where we're trying to get data from the user and learn about their use cases or how they heard about us. And this is a good place where, for example, all of the onboarding questions may have been required. Maybe we can't skip to the next step without filling out all these forms. So it is possible that all of these need to be filled out and this isn't really relevant, but we can use this same effect to ask additional questions to what we've learned here in the onboarding. And it can actually work really well because sometimes, if the onboarding is too long and too large, then it may cause users to churn before completing their setup. Whereas if you implement this effect, then you can still get that data out of them by once they've created their account. So without such a long onboarding process. So let's make note of that. We're going to add that into the prompt as well. It's possible that none of these questions will be left unanswered, excuse me. During the onboarding, full stop. Even if this is the case, still include this component, and it should ask questions such as how they heard about this product and potentially other useful questions that we may want to know as well. Great. So I'm going to copy all of that. I'm going to clear the context again. Now that that's done, let's paste in what we have. And I want to do this in plan mode because there's a variety of different things it needs to sort of do research, and then it needs to work out some of these new questions that it's going to ask, create the component. So let's put it in plan mode. Okay, we are back, and here's the plan. So background and approach, the Zeigarnik Effect tells us that people remember incomplete tasks better than completed one. So there are steps that cannot be skipped. There are steps that can be skipped. And those ones that do get skipped, we're going to add into this component. So it looks like it's got a variety of steps here. So it's got a summary and it's got some clarifying questions. So let's answer these. One, should the finishing step widget be floating popover that opens on click, or would you prefer it to be a persistent card banner that appears in the main content? Let's just say floating pop over. We don't want it to be too annoying. Two, for users who completed every onboarding step, the widget will only show the post-onboarding questions. Would you like any additional questions beyond those three? For example, company industry. You know what? I'm going to say whatever you think is best to collect relevant data. So we're going to leave it to the agent to decide that one. And then three, should there be a time-based behavior where the widget becomes more subtle after a certain period, e.g. 3 collapses? I think remain consistent. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, turn it off plan mode, and I'm going to send off that build. Okay, we're back. The agent's finished its prompt, and now let's test it out. So autofill. We've got all of these. Now let's purposely leave out some info. Oh, actually, didn't finish that first step. So create account. Great. So let's purposely, it looks like we can't continue here, but that's all right. Notice we haven't added a workspace logo, so we'll see if it remembers that. Again, we need to fill this out to progress. If we say this, I guess another required field. There we go. We're halfway. We're going to skip the time zone. Actually, it's by default, it's picked Pacific, English. Okay, yep. So it looks like we need to select all of those. Again, we need to select all of these. So we're going to skip the teammates. That's the second thing that we're going to skip. And we're all set. Go to dashboard. Great. Now let's have a look. And up here, we now have this finished setup. So it looks like it's kind of discrete. That's what we asked for in the plan. And if we click it, yes, we've got this component that appears. So how did we find Beam? Let's open that up. If we tick it off, we can't tick it off, which is great. So we actually have to select one of these and press save. Nice. Okay, great. So now just one second. Let's now click this again and look. Yeah, we can't tick that, but we can open it up. So this is great. Finish setup. What's your number one goal? We're going to say ship products faster. Sure. Let's save that. Great. Tell us about your company size. Okay. Yep. Nice. Industry. And when we press save, setup complete, and it removes that component. So that's a great way that you can get more customer data by using this effect, so that you can, otherwise I've got this annoying little finish setup, which just really bugs people. It's a psychology thing. I know I fall sucker to it whenever I see one of those. I'm like, oh, I want to finish that off. So you can use that in your product to gather valuable data about your customers. Now let's have a look. Let's see if there are some more prompts. All right, so here is Fitts law. So if we look at Fitts law, it's basically saying bigger and closer equals faster. So the tap time depends on the target size and the distance. So this is, I guess, mainly for mobile. So look, we've got a buy button down here compared to a buy button up here. Obviously, the larger it is and the closer it is to your thumb, then the easier it is to press. So let's come back in here. We're going to restart the onboarding, and we're going to go into responsive mode and notice how small the create account button is. Notice that we've got the privacy policy stacked next to it. Perhaps we could put that either above or below it. If we autofill and we go to the next one, oops, there we go. We're in. Now, also notice that this button changes position on the screen depending on how many questions we're asking. And then if we've got a lot of options, then it kind of pushes that button off the screen. So it feels like every page is a little bit different and this button's moving into different places. This is now covering that. So let's have a look at our prompt and let's see what it says. So do research into Fitz's law, stating bigger is closer and means faster to the user. With this in mind, using SVH, which is safe view height or small view height on when you think about mobile devices, you can use like Chrome as your browser, you could use Brave, you could use Safari, Microsoft Edge, a variety of different browsers, and each of these have a different user interface. So some of them along the bottom may display like an entire tab that cuts off some of the bottom. Some of them don't. Some of them, like I knew with Apple's new liquid glass design, they have this little liquid glass pill that sort of floats along the bottom. And there's a variety of different bottoms of depending on what your browser is. And depending on what that bottom looks like and what buttons the browser chooses to include, that may or may not crop the screen. And so by using SVH instead of just the view height, remember that view height is referred to as a percentage. So if you say 100 VH, then it makes a component the full height of the screen. But again, we're going to use SVH so that it doesn't get cropped off by some of those buttons on the browser. And then we're going to please redesign the mobile experience so the complete setup component is at the bottom part of the screen and is easy to complete. I'm actually going to change this a little bit, but first I'm going to bring it into Bolt. So I'll bring it in. And again, I think I'm going to clear the context. So clear. Now this time I'm going to change, instead of asking it to redesign the mobile experience, so the complete setup component is at the bottom part. Instead of just that last screen, we're going to say so that the entire onboarding flow has been designed ideally for mobile. Please redesign the mobile experience so the entire onboarding flow has been designed ideally for mobile and is at the bottom part of the screen. I think I can get rid of that. And is easy to complete. Great. Let's put that in plan mode and we'll send it off. So with that, hopefully it will maybe make this create account button larger, maybe keep it in the same place each time. And yeah, we'll see. And we're back, and here is our plan. Let's have a quick look through it because it's much better to read through the plan and correct it while it's still in plan mode than getting it to build it out and realizing you're not happy with it. So the plan redesigns the entire onboarding flow to be optimized for one-handed mobile use, applying Fitts law. Nice. So full height mobile layout foundation with safe or small view height. Looking good. Bottom anchored action bar. Nice. So hopefully it shouldn't move around. Enlarge touch targets throughout all the steps. Mobile optimized content scrolling and spacing, looking good. Progress bar, mobile redesign, nice. Okay. I'm pretty happy with that for the sake of the demo. Obviously, while you're building out your project, spend a little bit more time reading through this. So the current brand colors use this. Since you asked me to avoid that, should I replace? No, don't worry about replacing it. Keep as purple indigo. Now, you're probably wondering, where did we ask not to use that? And That is, I believe, in the Bolt system prompt. A lot of the times, AI will spit out a purple indigo themed design. And so to avoid that kind of default AI look, we've put that in the system prompt. But in this case, I actually don't mind it. So I'm going to leave it. Two, so for the swipe go back gesture, should this only trigger, you know what? I'm not going to worry about those gestures for now because we probably need to implement a gesture library. Don't worry about the swipe go back gesture for now, just add a back button. And then three, but obviously if you're building this out for real, that's probably a good user pattern to add in there. On the step account, confirm password field. Would you prefer I replace it with a show hide toggle? Yes, great. So take that off plan mode and let's build it out. Okay, we're back. The agent's finished working and have a look at this. It's redesigned this progress bar along the top to be a bit more mobile optimized. And now it's got this create account button all along the bottom there. So it does seem like it's taken away the autofill, but that's okay. I'll just go ahead and I'll fill it out this time. There we go. Create account. Okay, nice. Product road. I think what we need to do is let's actually sign out. Let's come back here and let's try that again. Okay, we're signed out. Let's come into mobile and test this out. Create. It does seem like it's jumping us straight into the dashboard rather than completing the onboarding flow. So let's just prompt this fix. I've noticed that when I'm in mobile view, after I create my account, it doesn't take me through the rest of the onboarding flow like it should. It takes me directly into the dashboard. So please fix so it has the same onboarding questionnaire as in web view. Great. Now, the one other thing I want to test for is let's come back out. Let's sign out again and let's see if it's broken it or if it's still here for web. Okay, so it looks like it's doing this first step twice. So that could use some fixing. And yes, it has actually jumped through. So let's change our prompt. I've noticed that when in mobile view and also in web view, it doesn't take me through the onboarding flow like it should. Please fix it. And I'm also going to say, sometimes I've noticed that when I'm creating an account with the first step of the onboarding flow that it's asked me to do this twice. Remember, it should only ask me this once. Great. So now let's send this off. You can see it's had a whole variety of steps here. So hopefully it hasn't deleted any of those onboarding flows, just redesigned them, and it's perhaps mixed up the routing of the steps. So hopefully it shouldn't be too much of a difficult fix. Okay, we're back and we can see the root fix component did not exit onboarding when auth state changes mid-flow. So often when we're doing something like this, it is just a small little fix. So here we go. Let's now come back into mobile. Excuse me. Let's check this out. Create account. Great. Okay, we're on to the second part. Testing. Available. And there we go. Look how that's collapsible. We've got the back. I don't think that's ideal, but we can prompt that to fix. I think there's still a massive improvement here. The back could probably be in line with the continue, so the continue doesn't pop up. But have a look at that. Now it's sticky on the bottom, which I think is good. Let's hit engineer, continue. And now let's have a look at this. Yep, looking good. Potentially we could make this progress bar sticky as well along the top, but that's not super necessary. Continue. There we go. Nice. That's a little bit better. At least it's not completely overlapping, which is good. Time zone. We've got all of this. Continue. Now, okay, they've made this a little bit larger. So it's not particularly clear, but again, we can go ahead and prompt it and it's much better what it was. And the whole purpose of this prompt was to really implement that rule that we were asking for about the proximity for the touch. So that's done that well. Go to dashboard. That could be lifted so it's in the same spot as the other ones. And there we go. Great. It's kind of got that professional feel to it now. This again could also be put in the right spot for mobile, but you get the point. We can go through component by component and fix these up. So there we go. That wraps up my end of refilming this build that we've done. We've implemented a variety of these rules, and now I'm going to hand it over to the rest of the workshop where we will finish things off. This is an example of what the prompt can do. So for example, sometimes, in the onboarding flow, you may be asking them, do you want to be setting up a product roadmap, a bug tracker, or a sprint board? Adding nice little SVG graphics like these here is just a really nice aesthetic touch that you can add. Okay, Gary, do you want to touch on the theory of the Doherty threshold?
Yeah, definitely. So, funny enough, we are experiencing some of the lag in our prompts, and this is very relevant to how we create software where users, depending on how the response speed is, we want to give them a different experience. So, for example, anything between 0 and 100 milliseconds feels very instant. We don't have to give them any feedback. And then between 100 and 400, give them a subtle confirmation is enough. And then between 400 and 1 second, maybe when their attention starts to waver, perhaps show a spinner or a loader to give them an indication that it's still being processed. Between 1 and 10 seconds, give them a modal that we are actually showing you on the Bolt page right now, which is a progressive meter that shows the progress that has taken place, what's done, and what's being worked on. Anything above 10 seconds, perhaps just give them a note telling them that to come back at a later time to view the changes and the progress that's been made. And sometimes we experience a heavy backend where there's a lot of data that's being processed or being updated. And if you can get around it, there are UI tricks, hacks that flourishes that you can include to make it seem, whether it's faster, but also just make that waiting experience more pleasant. And that way, it communicates to the users that you're very aware of the lag that exists. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but you want to give them that experience, even if things are outside of our control. So,
great. So, Gary, do you want to maybe explain the peak and end rule?
Yeah. So the peak end law is exactly what it sounds like. Very much like a movie. Think about the most memorable movies you've watched, the ones that give you a really positive impression. Often it's the third act that really captivated your attention. So very similar to a product experience. The end is what to remember. Users tend to rate a flow by its peak and its final moment. So somewhere in the middle of their product experience, you want to capture their attention and create more interest, and then having them ask what's next, and then engineer the finish like it matters, because it does. So you want the end experience to be a delight, something that was perhaps unexpected, but also giving them that confirmation that they have done everything that they needed to do. So, once we get this past prompt finish, we can go ahead and test this new prompt. Here, the idea is once they finish the sign up process, we will delight them with an explosion of confetti once they finish clicking the last button of the onboarding flow. Now, this is completely optional. You don't have to add confetti to any sort of multi-step forms, but it does bring a lot of joy to people's day, and I think I've used in several of the apps that I've built over the years, and people do talk about this, and people like to share this with their friends and coworkers. So,
do we have any questions so far? I can see there was one earlier from Carlos, but it looks like that's been answered in the chat. So if there are any questions, feel free to go ahead and ask, or Erica can put them on the screen, but it looks like we're all pretty clear so far.
Yep, doing my best. There's a lot in here.
Yeah.
Good job.
It's a really good question. She asked about how do these design principles apply to mobile. You know, a lot of well, first, depending on who your target audience is, right? If it's a consumer product, you want to make so let's talk about a checkout experience. You want to make the checkout experience by really emphasizing on that one action per view. So then, you know, because you're operating on one hand, naturally it's where that thumb is going to be clicking on. So if you are designing a checkout experience, what I like to think about is what is the end goal for this particular page? Is it to have them choose you know, different sizes, colors, and then you don't want to give them too many questions to think about, because what happens is, again, when you have too many questions or options, people tend to stall and they might click out of the page. So which is, you know, in this case, undesirable. So just, again, keep it very simple. Really emphasize on that one primary action, you know, and you can make that visual, whether it's through colors, spacing. But I think a lot of it comes down to the question is, again, what do you want your user to walk away with on this single page?
Great. Gary, do you want to touch also on the Zeigarnik effect?
Sure. So I think we've all seen a bit of this live just now from our Bolt prompt. And this one is effectively, you know, any incomplete work stays active in the working memory until it closes. So make that gap visible, and then the users will fill it. So just like what we have shown you with how Bolt is processing the prompts, it tells you the things that it's working on right now and the things that has already completed. So that gives the users a sense of the progression. And then not just on the path that they've already taken, but where they're going next. It's a nice touch. So you don't want to leave users hanging. You don't want to leave them in a state of confusion. So show them what's been done and then where they're going next.
Yeah. And then I guess specifically in the context of an onboarding flow like this, for example, if they do decide to like skip a step, they may not indicate, you know, maybe how they heard about the product, or they may not say what their organization size is. If they've skipped past some of those steps, you can ask Bolt itself to basically, you know, you can do research on the Zeigarnik effect. If a user skips over any questions from the onboarding process, please remember what they have skipped and add a non-blocking finish setup component to the top right of the dashboard after they've completed their onboarding. And so the act of them always seeing that, you know, it hasn't been completed, it may look something like this, where it says finish setup. If you're constantly showing a little pill in the top right, you need to finish your setup. You've got 2 actions left. Then by default, this effect basically says that they're going to want to finish those tasks and tick them off. So then they'll come in and they may provide you with the information that you're hoping to get out of the user.
Carlos asked a really good question. So conversational chat and forms to improve the UX UI when taking new users in. I'm assuming he's referring to, you know, rather than giving them a multi-step form, perhaps just give them a chat input, and then just start to have. It's very similar to, I guess, what modern AI conversation apps do, and that's complete. Again, it all comes back to what are you trying to, what user end behavior you're trying to drive, right? So are you trying to seek out and build this persona of this person by asking them, questions, or are you trying to get them to go somewhere? So, for example, again, let's come back to the checkout process. Perhaps in this case, it's better to just give them a very straightforward, set of questions so that they can fill out the right number of steps, and then they can check out and then complete the purchase. Now, if it's building a persona of a profile, that could be very open-ended. And so in that case, to sort of address the wide variety of users that are out there, it's hard to just pinpoint, a set of questions in this case. And now we have the technology to open that up to a conversation chatbot or a chat AI, instead of deciding on the set of, static questions that are forced upon these users. And often it's hard to, we tend to think things through our own perspective. And again, in modern day, we have AI now that can really sort of shapeshift into different personas and then get into the minds of our users more effectively than we have in the past. So to answer your question, I think depending on what action you're trying to drive, is it to complete something or is it to build something?
Mm-hmm. I will just add to that as well. If you do decide to go for a conversational AI route, then just be careful. Think about the guardrails, because often, people may come to these and they may start asking irrelevant questions, and they may be using it as their chatbot, which will rack up some of your API bills. So just be careful there, to make sure that you put very explicit guardrails on the agent to make sure it's only answering relevant questions. So, they're not using it for unnecessary other things.
It's a great point. And then Maddie, or is it Maddie, asked another great question. So about switching into a new page to give more information about an element in a homepage versus the use of a panel sidebar without quitting the homepage. It's a great question. I think I always like to keep users on the page that they were in. It's once they leave a page, they tend to not come back. So I think sidebars is a great component you can use. You can also use modals, and that way you keep and then you design it in a way where it doesn't obstruct whatever that they were looking at previously. Obviously, sometimes you kind of have to if it's a modal and you want them to, again, execute an action that's unavoidable. But generally, if you can still keep their attention on whatever that they're looking at previously, but also introduce a slider or anything that kind of goes on top of another layer, that's very helpful. So I would avoid taking them to a different page.
Gary, I'll hand this over to you if you want to touch on Jacob's law.
Yeah. So in this case, it's really just don't reinvent the wheel, right? So users spend 99% of their time on the other apps. So the conventions have already been established. And I think more and more we see similar patterns to how web apps or mobile apps are designed. And my personal opinion on this is, I think, again, what kind of action you're trying to drive? If it's a checkout process, make it as simple, make it as standard as possible. You don't want to create unnecessary roadblocks for the user. Now, there are cases, I think this is very specific to perhaps web design, because there's a lot more width and a lot more screen space that you can play around, whereas on a mobile phone it's very limited. And this all depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So if you want to create intrigue, I actually do think it's okay to be unconventional and get out of that box, if you will, and then you can play around with unconventional design techniques. So instead of having this like big buttons everywhere, you can actually maybe make it more of a discoverable experience. And the reason, because the intent is to create intrigue, right? To kind of create this excitement, and not necessarily a sort of absolute sort of destination of, okay, I want you to click that buy button to make this purchase. And of course, this all depends on the brand itself, right? If you're a brand that's very whimsical and fun, maybe even like, mysterious, it's okay to introduce unconventional design techniques. Now, if you're a more of a straight shooting, standard product, then I would play it safe and then stay within the boundaries of the standard.
Great. Okay, there are a few other things that I just want to bring up as well that we don't have slides on. So first of all, if we're writing out text, I think the sweet spot between characters per line is between 45 and 75 characters. If you've got more than 75, then the lines get too large, and when you're reading, it's hard for the eye to go down onto the next line. So usually around sort of 65 to 70 characters per line is the sweet spot, which leaves about, that's sort of 9 to 15 words per slide. So that's kind of like a nice sweet spot. If you're using text, try not to make it go the whole width of your window on desktop, sort of try and shrink that a little bit. Another thing is there's kind of line height and length rules. So the longer your line is, the more space you want between the lines, because it's easier for the eye to jump down to the next one. If you look at like our heading here, for example, it's very short. We've only got 2 words per line. In this case, you can actually reduce the line height and bring these closer together. Notice how there's a larger gap down here. Okay. So we've got also some rules about contrast as well. Basically, if you're unfamiliar with this, there is kind of this rule of thumb that we like to have a 4.5 to 1 contrast ratio. This basically determines, it uses the hex values and it looks at the colors. So if you've got a light gray on a medium gray, the contrast ratio will be quite low, but if you've got a white on black, obviously the contrast is a lot higher. So this is something that you can ask for. You can just simply prompt the agent, say, please look through our site, make sure that the contrast ratio meets certain standards using WCAG. AA standards is preferable, and then AAA is ideal. So I think AA is above 3 to 1, and then AAA is 4.5 from memory. Great. So we're almost getting there. We've also got a couple other checks as well. Here are basically 10 takeaway checks that you can go through mentally. So I don't know if we'll touch on all of these, but Gary, if there's some that you wanna touch on here that people can sort of keep at the forefront of their mind. Just a quick little reminder that we will have all of these slides available to you. So we'll post a workshop recording, and then also we have a specific dedicated site, which Eric has added in the comments, workshops.bolt.host. You're able to view our past workshops here and actually download the slides. So if you want to come back to this, don't worry, don't feel like you need to, download these screenshots. You can just download the PDF once we're done. So is there anything you'd like to touch on here, Gary?
Yeah, I would like to answer both Carlos and is it Oran's? They both asked a question around prompting, the prompt structure, and in the case of Carlos, the initial prompt. So I think it's a really, really good question. It all depends on, obviously when you're building a new website, there's a lot that goes into your mind around, whether it's the colors, the aesthetics, the modernity, and all that stuff. I always like to ask, or at least put in the prompt these set of questions. So the product name, what it does in one sentence, whether it's product or it could be a portfolio page and whatnot, who the target audience is. And I think this next one is the most important, which is 2 or 3 websites that you like. You can also include reference websites that you do not want. So I think AI does a really good job of avoiding things if you make it very clear. So any sort of negative is actually quite important to include. The emotional feeling that you want to convey, to the users. So it could be whimsical, minimal, bold, premium, serious, unserious. So inputting the mood, making that very clear to Bolt, I think it's very helpful. And other things like font preferences, serif, sans serif, monotype, and of course colors. I think a lot of the colors you can actually probably get from the reference sites that you're choosing. So perhaps when you're sharing the reference websites, make it clear that you want these set of colors. And I would definitely focus on 1 or 2 colors in the beginning and not have too many. I hope that answers your question. Oh, and you also asked about the md.design MD files about 2 or 3 weeks. Yeah. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, I'll just elaborate on that a little bit as well. Sometimes, let me just, I'll bring a project so that you can all see that. As Gary was saying, it's great to mention all of these things so that your agent can use that. The more context, the better. This was that second project that ended up completing its build. If you do make these design decisions and you want your agent to remember these throughout the life cycle of your build progress, there's 2 ways you can do it. One is you can come into the project knowledge and basically mention that here. So this is a prompt that the agent appends to every single prompt that you make. So you can basically say, I would like a minimal and professional aesthetic. Something like that, and save that in the prompt. So now your agent will always remember, even when you clear the context, it'll use that going forward. And then that also comes into a design Markdown file. So for those of you unfamiliar with like a design Markdown file, Markdown is basically a file type that's great because it's sort of human readable and it's agent readable as well. So you can create one just like this, design.md, and then you can go ahead and basically use I think it's like hashtags like this to set up a heading in Markdown. And then you can, so you could say like design rules, and then you can go ahead and basically outline that. Now, a lot of the times you may not want to have to write this design Markdown file yourself. So I can show you a great tool for those of you who have been on these workshops before. You'll probably recognize this. For those of you who are new, Google Stitch has done a great job of creating this design tool, which will spit out a design Markdown file for you. So if I come, I'll look into one of the previous prompts that I've used. Here you can see my prompt. I basically asked for, here's the prompt. I said, please create a design system for a messaging app. The primary color should be blue and it should look friendly, inviting, and playful. And so this is basically the design system Google Stitch has created. And then it's created a variety of screens as well. So this is a great way where you can just use a simple prompt like that to create this design system. You can come in, click edit on the design system. And once you click edit, you'll notice it's got the theme, which you can customize here. You can change the font, the corner radius, etc. And with this theme, it creates its own design Markdown file. Now, Google just released a universal standard for this design Markdown file. And what they do is they actually reference all of the colors in here. And then when it comes to like components or whatnot, they're now saying primary blue, which has been mentioned up in here as, primary blue. So this kind of, they've established this standard as of about two or 3 weeks ago to find the best practice when it comes to creating a design Markdown file. So you can sort of adhere to these standards. What you can do is you can basically copy this design Markdown file. You can come back into your Bolt project, and I'm going to now paste that in here. And if I press save, it's now saved that into design.md. I'm going to go into my project knowledge and I'll say, when making any design decisions, please use information from the design.md file in the project root. So there we go. Make sure that it's all spelt correct. And I'm going to save that in my project knowledge. Now I'm going to close that. And now if I ask, please redesign this onboarding flow to use the design decisions from the design.md file. So with a little bit of luck, let's see if this project builds. I'm going to send that off. And what the agent should do now is read through that design markdown file and then apply all of that to the onboarding flow. So it looks like we haven't encountered an error initially. So we'll come back to that in a few minutes. Great. I see we've only got about 5 minutes left. So Gary, if there's any more of these checks here that you want to touch over, feel free.
Yeah, I think it's, again, whenever I look at any particular page that I'm working on, I think I just focus on a few central points, which is, what is it that you're trying to communicate here? What is it that you want the user to achieve? And also the more important one, which is, what do you want them to be left behind with? So is it for them to ask what's next, or is it that that they have a very, a memorable experience, right? So we've talked about confettis, if that's at the tail end of their journey. We talked about reducing the number of options, so that's more presentable, and that's more around what's next. So I think these are just really three, I would call it, just my own principles that I follow when I think about designing for each page. And then, we've arrived at a point where things like Stitch or other tools are out there allow us to kind of get the more mundane things out of the way. And then it frees us more mental space to focus on things that can delight users. Yeah, back to you, Brian.
Great. Thanks, Gary. I see Michelle's asked us a good question. If we're building first for desktop, then realize later we need to add polish on mobile, what's the best way to prompt Bolt? Is it page or is it page by page? Good question. With some of the test projects we've been doing on our end, if there's only like a handful of pages, maybe 5 pages or less, usually the agent can do a good job doing all of that at once. But say you've got 20 or 30 different pages, that's quite a big ask for the agent. So I would break it down. Doesn't necessarily have to be page by page. You can sort of cluster these pages together. So for example, like the onboarding flow, that may be one set of cluster of pages that you could ask the Bolt agent to redesign all of those together. So redesign all of the onboarding pages for mobile. And because they're relevant and because they're sort of sequential, you'll see one after the other, it's good to kind of use the context of one of these onboarding pages redesigns for another one. But then once you've completed the onboarding and you move on to like the dashboard, then that's probably worth doing that as another prompt. I hope that answers the question, Michelle. Let's jump over. Okay, this is still building, so it probably won't finish in time, but we'll see how well it does. Maybe, yeah, it may finish after the project's after the workshop's done. Great. Do we have any more questions? I see we've got a few fans of Google Stitch. Brennan saying, love Google Stitch. Carlos is saying, Stitch for the win. It really does a great job of converting the emotions that you want to convey into a design markdown file. And something we're really excited to announce, that because you guys are here on the workshop, I can give you a little sneak peek into what's coming. We have announced a partnership with Google Stitch. So basically what that will mean is once you generate your designs in Google Stitch, there will be a button added in there where it says import directly into Bolt. And so instead of having to, copy some of these, like the HTML or whatever, across directly into Bolt, now we'll be adding a direct button. So for all of our Stitch fans out there, not sure exactly when that will be released, but it is on the horizon, so it should be coming soon. So yeah, I see we've got some fans there. Cool. Well, it just about takes us to time. sort of curious to see how this ends up. So hopefully it sort of jumps through a few steps. Do we have any more questions for Gary? Any questions for Erica? I can see Erica, you've been doing a good job answering some of the questions in the chat.
No.
Yeah. Look, again, guys, apologies for everything that's going on. I think, as Erica mentioned before, this is our first day rolling out this max and standard plan. So usually we do a lot of internal testing before we roll out features. This is a rare case where we're having some actual production issues or some issues on production. So bear with us. It won't be long until it's all resolved. And as I said, I'm kind of curious to see how this builds out, so I might just kill a little bit of time. Thanks for joining us, Gary and Erica. Really appreciate it. They've always done a great job, as always. Gary, if people want to find you online or reach out to you, do you have any like LinkedIn or Twitter that you wanna suggest?
You can find me on LinkedIn. Just search for my full name, Gary Liu, Liu. Hopefully I'm number 1 on the list, but I might not be. Put in Bolt in there and you'll find me. I'm not on Twitter, so you won't find me there. You can also email me, which is just my first name .liu@stackblitz.com. There's another Gary that took over the first name only. But if you send an email to him, I'm sure he's a lovely guy. He'll respond to you immediately. So. But yeah, I'm open to, if you have any more questions. Oh, thanks for putting that email. Yeah, if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to help you and give you any advice that I could provide. So super appreciate you guys taking the time to go on this ride with us for the last hour.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thanks, everybody. Just to respect all of our participants' time, Gary, you're welcome to drop if you want. Same with you, Erica. I'm going to hang around because I want to see how this Google Stitch design Markdown file does, and it looks like the agent's working again. So yeah, feel free to stick around if you want to see how this turns out. Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining, y'all.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. As always, feedback is appreciated. I'm sure there's the obvious feedback here is getting the agent working. So no need. We'll work on that for next time.
What
was that, Gary?
The whole company is aware now. So
yeah, that's right.
Will, are you in the US or where are you calling from today?
Yeah,
okay.
I'm calling in from San Francisco.
Yeah, so I was wondering if you were running into a Cloudflare error. So that might have been.
I know it's funny. I mean, GitHub's been having issues. Cloudflare's been having issues. These usually very stable platforms have been running into issues, and I think for the amount of GitHub commits that we've seen like over the last 6 months has just dramatically ramped up, and I think it's because of vibe coding tools like ourselves. This prompt-driven development makes it so much easier. So I think like the the demand that puts on the infrastructure does mean that these usually really trustworthy upstream providers end up having issues, and it leads to sort of downstream issues here. But we're actually working on building a tool that basically shows when we have any of these issues. So it'll kind of be like a traffic light system. Green is when, all systems go. Orange, maybe some systems will be down. And then red, obviously, it's not working. So that's something that we've talked about internally last week, and should be something that we'll roll out soon, so that hopefully you're not wasting tokens when we're having issues like this. I know we get a lot of questions coming up about token usage when prompts don't complete or when they don't work perfectly. At the moment, if you think about it from our perspective, we pass on your requests over to our inference providers, whether that's like Anthropic or somebody else. But, if you have the Anthropic model selector, then we're still paying for that inference. And so you may be asking, why are we wasting tokens when our prompt doesn't get completed? And that's this internal debate we have of passing on that cost to the customers or not. And we're actively working on improving that agent so that we have that less and less and less. coming back to the project, it looks like it's almost done. So if we look at our Stitch
then
project, we're basically
how many employees now? 75, 80 employees.
about
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
I'm sure it's around 70 to 75.
Yes. Yeah. Now, this is kind of the interface that we're expecting. Let's see. It's almost done.
Oh,
I hear it's complete. We'll wait for it to refresh. All right, there we go. Much better. So let's quickly test this out. So if I notice, it's worked really nice for this first page. It's included this theme blue, this primary blue color that we wanted. It's used these lightly rounded corners. We can see it's added this here. Now, if I press continue, great. Okay, it's added this to the second page as well. So we can say this, select our industry. Now, if we press continue, yes, okay, nice. It's got this universal theme effectively throughout the first 3 steps of the onboarding flow. Yes, step 4, we can see it's added this as well. Step 5, great. So basically, I guess what this demo demonstrates is you can retroactively add a design markdown file into your project. Just come into Stitch, generate one that you're happy with, and add it into the project like I did. Don't forget to add it into the project knowledge as well. And then you can effectively retroactively redesign your pages so that it's now using this design system. So I'm glad we could show something to you that was working at some point along the way. So again, thanks for joining us. I hope you found it useful. Big thank you, Gary, for being here, going through, sharing all of your knowledge with us. Thank you, Erica, for answering the questions. Sorry, I see we've got one more question. We maybe do our best. Just a quick off-topic question. Is the referral program still not working? Is there a reason why? Yeah, so Erica, do you have any viz on that?
We're working on kind of revamping this, so I wouldn't rely on whatever is happening now to work for you. If you do want a referral, please shoot us an email at support@Bolt.new and we can try and work something out for you. But we're working on launching a new referral program soon. That's
right. Thanks for all the feedback, everybody. I appreciate it. And we'll see you on next week's workshop. So catch you then. Thanks, everybody. All right. Bye.